Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of our podcast, the Pic-A-Talk Podcast, PodTalk. I am your host, Yuma Roa, and today's topic, we'll be talking about the autism spectrum disorder. Now, as most of you know, I grew up with my autistic sister, and she became the inspiration for our application, Pic-A-Talk. Now, despite having this experience, it's not enough to cover this entire topic. No two cases of autism are the same, which is why we've invited a special guest to talk to you about it. Please welcome Teacher Q.
Afternoon or good day.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Jorino Mijares Cardona, but when I'm teaching special education or special kids, I'd like to be called only as Teacher Q. So it's easier for kids to remember and not difficult for them to spell out, or it's also the recall would be faster. So that's why I'd like to be called as Teacher Q. Okay. So my real name is Jorino. It came from Jose Quirino, so that's why my nickname technically is JQ, but I stuck with the name as for teaching special kid children. I stuck with the name Teacher Q. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, that
So
makes a lot of sense.
you. Okay. So I actually took this challenge or this invitation. I accepted this one because aside from the host, no, revealing that she has a sister na was ASD. Both of my kids actually have autism also. So before I got married, I am already a special education teacher. Then when I got married, then when I had children, both of my kids have autism. So my eldest is running 12 and my youngest is running 8. So both of them have autism. So actually, I'm taking this, no, parang accepting this interview as a way also of educating the community when it comes to special education, specifically for children with autism. So because there have been a lot of misconception also, so at least hopefully with this short interview, some of you would be clarified by it.
Thank you so much, Teacher Q. So
Okay.
as you've mentioned, you were a special education teacher before you got married. So how long has that been?
So I started teaching special education, special kids way back 2000. Okay, I could recall that we were the first special school or private special school here in Iligan City. So, but initially when I started, I did not have any idea about special education. Although my first course, I'm a physical therapy graduate. Yung first, parang the owner encouraged me to teach because she said na the kids are not crying during your session. Maybe you could help out in the teaching part also. So that kind of motivated. Actually, I think the motivation would be the monetary part because the owner told me if you teach, I'd give you more. But if you're not going to teach, you'd still stuck with this per hour system. So the motivation was that. So that was my first encounter actually teaching special children. So I did not yet had any formal training except the owner of that private special school. She had her training in Japan. So she was sharing the ideas. She had a lot of or variety of collection of books at that time. So every week she would be giving me a book to read or to study on. So that's where I got interested in teaching. The word that I'm using for now is teaching. I did not really yet engage or parang got really much interested yet on the actual idea of me teaching special children. Kasi after there, I tried to teach regular kids. When I started teaching regular kids, that's the time I realized that I don't really like to teach regular kids. I'd rather teach special children. So after that one, maybe it took me around 5 years. Then this time I shifted and went back to I really like to teach special children.
That's a wonderful start to your career. So it's like some sort of calling for you. So as you said, you teach special children. What percentage of this would be the autistics Do you only teach autistics, or are there other ones?
Okay, when I was teaching in a private special school, first, I guess well, I started with children with physical disabilities. So, but then since you could not really focus on children with physical disabilities, since my first course really is I'm a PT graduate, so uh, they focus much more on children with physical disabilities, the one that they were giving to me. But then, since the number of students really that go to special schools are children with autism, children with Down syndrome, so they were able to give me children with autism already during that time. Those were my first few encounters with children with autism. These children with autism that were under me, I think I had four of them. One of them actually, I could say, is able to. He's already now in college. No, he was really diagnosed to have autism. He had echolalia when he started, but then he was able to reach college. So I was able to meet him around a year, 2 years ago. That he was making this from his paper or activity. That's the time. But the mother was able to remember me, but the child could no longer remember me. So it's still okay. So that's how I started really. So I just kind of rested for 5 years when I was teaching regular kids in one of the private schools here in Iligan City. And after 5 years, that's then, as I mentioned, I really enjoyed teaching special children. So I went back to teaching special children. So when I started teaching special children in the public school, the first few kids that they were giving me were kids that most of them were behavioral problems at the beginning. But then later on, they were giving me children with autism. I was able to land also a scholarship, which would also focus on teaching children with autism. But then, most of my training, maybe I got it during my first year because originally, as I mentioned, yung owner of the private special school, which gave me the opportunity to start teaching special children, they had a lot of books and a lot of magazines that they would give to us. We would study everything about children with autism. So that's where really maybe I got my training. But then the encounter of the children started way back 2000. So it's not really my first time to see kids or be able to witness or see the changes of these children. So way back 2000, I have already encountered children with autism.
I see. So as you mentioned, you've taught a lot of children with autism. You also have two children yourself who are on the spectrum. So could you tell us exactly what is autism spectrum disorder?
Okay. If you don't really mind the year it was published, you might think what I'm going to say is wrong, or what you have read you might say that it's wrong or something. But since 2000, as far as I really could remember, since 2000, the definition, the classification of autism has really changed. Okay, it's not the same anymore. Way back 2000 to 2007, 2008, there would still be words like pervasive or pervasive developmental disorders, PDD, autism spectrum disorder, which is the umbrella of something, so on and so forth. So it has changed really. Even DSM-4 has different classification when they became DSM-5. So DSM is it's a book, or it's a compilation of different disorders or disabilities. Well, anyway, it has changed a lot. So if I'm going to define now, as of this moment, what is autism? It is a neurodevelopmental disorder or a developmental disorder. And they will accept that one. If you're my student who's gonna be taking up special education and you are going to define autism to me, autism spectrum disorder, I would accept neurodevelopmental disorder or developmental disorder. Why? Before, years ago, it's really difficult to to define autism because it is under a certain category. But now, because of the advancement and the research and recent studies, it has changed. Okay, so if you have a sister, you read the definition 5 years, 10 years ago, the definition could have changed already today. Okay, so it's not the same. So if you have read a book also, you have a pinaka-ingat-ingatan na libro for 10, 15 years, then it has a definition of autism. It might not be the same already today. So it has been evolving. Why is it evolving? Because people are doing research, studies about autism. So it has to change. So going to the idea of changes, kasi the if if the cause is not yet known, people would try to know what it is. So when they try to know what it is, definitions, the terminology could change later on. So if you really are going to research also on autism, most people would like to know how they are going to detect it. What are the signs and symptoms for autism? I'd always go for the triad. I always tell people, my parents, that it's a triad. When we say triad, there are only three things that you're going to check. First is social interaction or socialization of the child. Second is the behavior. Specifically, it's the repetitive behavior or unusual behavior. Third is communication, both receptive and expressive. When we say expressive, the child's ability to say things or be able to utter. Ang receptive, the ability for the child to receive the information. So, a child with autism or a person that has autism spectrum disorder has problems with these three areas. Okay, socialization. We have the second part is the repetitive behavior, and the third part is communication. If you say they line up objects, lining up of objects is repetitive behavior. If you say that they go into tantrums, that's for me, issue of communication problem. They could not express themselves, they could not receive what you're trying to say, so they might go into tantrums. Socialization, not be able to interact with other people. So those are the things. So for signs and symptoms, that's how I would usually parang define it. So if it's a neurodevelopmental disorder or developmental disorder with problems in the areas of socialization, communication, and repetitive behavior. Also, since the definition or the name or autism, it's called autism spectrum disorder, I'd rather really explain it in a concept of yung prism. I don't know if you know what a prism is. Yung, di ba yung during physics classes that I'm so sure it's being explained by the physics teacher, there's a parang pyramid. It's called a prism. It's glass. When you try to hit the prism with a light, it bursts into parang rainbow colors.
Yes.
Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That one. So it's a spectrum. So the spectrum there, each color represent for me, if I'd explain it to everybody, each color represents a certain a strength or weakness. So it could be can't talk, goes into tantrums, does not go into tantrums, can interact with other children, does not interact with other children. So depending on the, let's say, the strength or the weakness nga ni-manifest sa bata, that's where the characteristic of the child is. A person with autism, there's no two persons would be the same. Okay? Regardless of same genes, same whatsoever, the spectrum actually would be really different. So the other one can talk early, the other one could not talk early. This is also very evident in studies that some of the even twins, identical twins, that if they have autism, both of them would have autism, they would not have the same problems or issues. So each one of them would really be unique from the other. So that's an example. So for me, if that's why it's called as autism spectrum disorder, that's the best example that I could give to you, or best explanation that I could give to you, is when parang yung beam of light hits the prism and creates this rainbow of colors, and each of these rainbow colors represents a characteristic or symptom. That is how we should be able to picture a spectrum. So it's never gonna be the same. So each child is really unique on his own way or on her own way. So it's never really gonna be the same. Like in my case, I have kids. Both of them have interventions. But my daughter, she's very verbal. She's sociable. She can interact. She can ask questions. But my younger child hardly would be able to interact. Same as the age sa akong daughter before. So, because he belongs on different spectrum. So every time a parent would always hear the word he or she belongs on different spectrum, it just simply says the child is manifesting different signs and symptoms compared to the other kid. So even if I have 15 special children or 15 children with autism right now, these kids would have different manifestations or different, how would I say it, different signs and symptoms that they would be manifesting. So it's never going to be the same. So it's one thing that's very important. And one thing that I guess we should tell people, that if it doesn't mean you have seen one child with autism already, you have seen everybody already. So they're not going to be the same. No? So for a long time that I've been teaching, I could not find any kid that I have that's similar. Some of them could be extremely lovable. Some of them could be extremely, a little bit physical. So they're really different. So that's the uniqueness in them. Okay.
Wow, that's really helpful, Teacher Q. Thank you for that. So as you mentioned that it is a spectrum, right? So they all have like different abilities, different capabilities, different weaknesses as well. So it's like an umbrella term for a multitude of disabilities. Is that correct? Or not really disabilities?
You use the word umbrella. That's why kind of I asked, parang nag-question mark akong face. Yes, because technically years ago they used it umbrella. No, umbrella of because each area daw lain-lain. But now that's why I would really encourage people to use the word spectrum, because kung umbrella, it's very limited and it goes round and round. But then if it's a spectrum, if the wave goes this way, the one on top would be different from the one on bottom. So I'd rather use the word spectrum kasi meaning this could be the one on top could be the very good behavior, the one on the bottom is not. So the spectrum for me is really a very good definition or terminology that they use autism spectrum disorder. It's the one that really, for me, a very nice term to use for children with autism. Kasi when years ago it was just called autistic disorder, then they separated Asperger's also. So this time they're also considering Asperger's and autistic disorder, yung autism spectrum part of that one. So it's kind of yun nga, because it has changed already. Yung people have been studying, doing research about autism, which is much better, no? So yung terminology of umbrella, well, I think that was 10, 15 years ago, very much acceptable. When I was still studying, I remember that one, that we would use that one. But now I'd rather stick with spectrum because of the idea nga of yung like the prism, you know, how it's done, how it's arranged. So if you look at the prism, if it's dark green, light green, so on and so forth. So those are the characteristic that we would be expecting from the child. So meaning a child could have multiple, if you'd like to give him or her a color, has multiple colors. Could not really be assessed in one color lang. That's why if you remember, ang symbol good sa autism is the puzzle that has different colors.
Yeah.
Ang pinaka-symbol niya. So that's why it's giving that way, because of that one. to the spectrum it is.
Okay, I understand
That's
now.
it.
Got
That's
it.
it.
So you mentioned Asperger's syndrome is also considered under autism spectrum disorder, right?
Mm, yes,
So
not really under, but it has already been parang some of the children, some of children with autism, they have their actually what we call savant skills, yung special skills. Slowly now they're placing Asperger syndrome in the idea na naana siya sa part na siya sa spectrum. Okay?
mm,
So but again, because they could not even classify them properly, how would we gauge na this already falls in the category of the Asperger syndrome or autism? So slowly, if you do your research also for Asperger syndrome, hardly there would not be any new data about it. Kasi there's slowly, parang it's already been slowly been incorporated in the spectrum. Okay, so like it was maybe given much more of a not say weight or what's given more idea because years ago picture good ang mga children with autism having this savant skill, which again we go back to the idea of the spectrum. It doesn't mean that one child has parang savant skill. Everybody, all special kids would have savant skills already. Savant is like kung Asperger ba siya, can read ba, can write ba faster, can color, can paint, mo na siya. So it could be a savant skill, kanang very good kay siya na not all of them could have it. Okay, that makes them unique also. Murag similar ra gyapon sa regular people, not all of us are very good painter, not all of us are very good singers. So it just was just given emphasis. Okay, so yung pagiging Asperger or savant skills not present. I have not really encountered that I could consider good 100% na it's his savant skill. For all, I have a student na ay savant skill or Asperger syndrome. Well, the one that is in college, I might consider him, but he dili man kayo outstanding ang iyang how would I say it? He belonged to the spectrum or maybe intervention was able to help him, but he does not really have a savant skill. Yun.
Okay, I see. Because what I've read, then, sir, I also read that Asperger's was already part of the autism spectrum disorder, and there are also other different types. Would you be able to share about the different types of
Okay.
autism?
Years ago, we don't have the levels of autism. As I mentioned, PDD, other PDD, we have childhood dissociative, Rett syndrome, we have Asperger's, we have autism disorder. So these things, even Rett syndrome does not no longer belong. No, before even definition for children with autism is if it's a male, it belongs to autism disorder. Then if it's a female version of PDD, it's the Rett syndrome. No longer that one exists because like Rett, they already have the cause of Rett syndrome. They know already the cause. So na move na siya, wala na siya sa PDD. So even for what you call this one, for this time na we have this mga levels, before we don't have the levels of autism. Kung ano lang, kung may na siya sa ASD siya. But now they have already levels of autism. Level 1, that's the milder form, that they could be able to read, that they could be able to write, they would be able to interact, they would have minor mga behavior problems. Kumbaga, manageable. These are level 1 ASD. The level 2, they are the people who need mga therapists. Okay, some assistance from therapists, not necessarily full-time assistance. But yung level 3 are the ones that they need. They could be non-verbal. They are the ones who really need a lot of assistance. So these are level 3. So before, years ago, I could remember maybe 2010, 2012, hardly I could read more data or details about that one. I could not really read data about that one. But recently, there are a lot of data about this one already. Level 1, level 2, level 3 of autism or ASD. So there's level 1 autism, level 2 autism, level 3 autism. So these are the latest things or studies about autism. So basta before walang level 1, level 2, level 3. So if the child can write, could not write, can't read, can read, ASD siya. Pero ngayon meron ng autism spectrum disorder level 1, autism spectrum level 2, autism spectrum level 3. No, so maybe later on, if they go further studies, they might be autism spectrum level 4, or they will be changing it, altering it. So maybe there will be changes later on. Oo.
From what I've heard before, sir, there was a labeling such as low functioning and high functioning
Yes,
autism.
yes, yes.
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 But I also read and I also actually listened to a different podcast that says that this is no longer applicable nowadays because of how detrimental it is for the individual themselves. Could you explain more why that is?
Okay. Um, Even if you notice, when I am trying to explain, I don't call them autism. I always call them children with autism because we're very particular with child's rights. We're protecting the rights of the students. We'd always go to the idea of giving dignity to them. So calling them low functioning, high functioning would also be not giving dignity to the children. So that's why they maybe have changed also from low functioning to high functioning. That's why they're using level 1, level 2, level 3. So that's why I've been saying maybe the things that we would be discussing now might not be acceptable years from now again because of it's very fast. The studies is very fast lately about autism. So there are a lot of new studies. So even yung mga child's rights, giving children dignity, that's why we call children with Down syndrome, children with autism, children who are visually impaired. We give them the dignity. That's why we change the idea, even calling them low functioning, low IQ, high IQ, or whatsoever. It has to change. So that's why we're slowly the idea of giving dignity is by changing how we address their condition. So we call them according to their condition at the same time to their how would I say it, to their, if they're still a child, we call them children with autism or child with autism. So we no longer call them like typical na blind person, no more. It's just to give the dignity to the child or to the person.
Yes, because labels are quite important, especially nowadays. Yeah.
Oh,
I see. So thank you for that, sir. So at what
okay.
age are they usually diagnosed with autism? Like, at what
Okay.
age do you see these symptoms that you've told us before? What age do they manifest?
Okay. When I started, there's really a text or a book that would say they would be diagnosed 3 years old. Okay, so meaning if you suspect them that they would have autism by 2 years old, final diagnosis would be given at 3 years old. But now, I think last year, I met a veterinary pediatrician that told me that then they can diagnose as early as 1 year and 10 months. Because of the recent studies, the recent texts, the recent trainings that they can actually determine by 1 year and 10 months. So I'm not so sure. I have not really witnessed it, but she has told me na they can actually be able to, as long as the data that is presented to them is the one that's accurate, they could actually detect it. So years ago, you have to wait for 3 years old for confirmatory age, parang ganon. But now they can diagnose the child 1 year, 10 months. That's definite that they could give the diagnosis already.
How does the
For like in the case,
diagnosis work? Like, how do they
okay.
diagnose the kids?
So since this is a neurodevelopmental or developmental disorder, so you have to be very particular or familiar with the developmental milestones. each person or each child has a milestone that's gonna achieve. Like example, from from the baby, kung motor skill, from the supine position, yung nakatihaya, from the child will be able to roll on prone position, lift its head. Those are milestones. So the development pediatrician, if she's really well versed with the milestones, or because of the recent researches, they can actually give diagnosis already. Years ago, some people, even now, no, I would say, some people would not really uh, believe on, especially sa Philippines, would believe on having the child checked by a development pediatrician. Okay, I think one of the reason is we're not really much educated yet when it comes to children with disabilities. We still believe on the idea of yung mga doctors or voodoo or mga lihi-lihi. That's why we refuse to accept anything that's out of the ordinary. Like for example, I've been teaching already since I mentioned since 2000. Ever since I started teaching, I encountered already 4 parents who would not sign a disability form to get a discount card for their children because their kids now are not disabled, but then their kids are under my class. That's one. Another reason is um, siguro aside from the lack of education is because it's a little bit of a taboo in our society. If you have a child with special needs, sometimes people think it's a form of punishment, so they try to parang keep the child, no, or hide the child sa society. So if maybe that's why I accepted this interview, is at least to send the message to everybody that this is not actually the case, no, na it's a you should bring out the kids so that you should expose the kids. So, but for me, based also on my personal experience, I would definitely agree na even though no, there's not yet, I have not really read a full text about the genetics of autism, but I think autism really is genetics. Genetically, it is it is embedded in the genes. That's why people would have sons or daughters that have autism.
Yeah, I've also heard of people saying that autism is caused by vaccinations. So, yeah,
Uh,
that's
those
also
are years
another.
and years ago studies.
Yeah,
So that's very much of a myth. Yet. That's not really true. Kasi if it's true, maybe we'll have more cases now. So
yeah,
since you mentioned that one, actually, people would say mas daghan daw karon. No, I would disagree with it. It's just that we have a better system of identifying children with
that's true.
autism now. That's why we would be able to detect them compared to before. So before, because yun nga, like there's no social media, there's no computer. So if I have one special child here, we're inside the room, so nobody would know about it. For now, it's really much more of for me because of the advanced technology that we have. That's why they are able to detect these things. Like even development pediatricians, there was no development pediatricians before. That's why even here also, I'm encouraging people if you suspect that your son or daughter has a developmental issue or a problem, go seek for medical, no? Go to a doctor para ma-check yun kung sa real condition. Like in our case, yung special education teachers, ethics actually prevents us from telling the parents the real condition of the child. We can tell the parents na your son or daughter has difficulty of writing, has difficulty with interacting with other kids, or has difficulty communicating, but we cannot give the idea, mom, your son or daughter has autism, because we're not the person in authority to give that kind of or give the diagnosis. It's a developmental pediatrician. So, parang proper professionals should be the one that should be consulted. We should go to the developmental pediatrician for proper diagnosis. The only thing that we could give is tell the parents that your son has yun na, difficulty reading, difficulty in writing, difficulty playing with other kids, but we've never been able to give them the diagnosis. Okay?
I see. So they have to go to the proper professionals for the diagnosis.
The thing with developed pediatrician is supposedly it's like the parent should go to the development pediatrician every 6 months for follow-up, for evaluation, which is not normal for any other medical condition. Let's say if you have a fever or if you have a, let's say, lung problem, you go to a doctor until you're healed. So, ang development pediatrician, actually, they would only release you once the child is already capable or has reached its maximum capacity. But technically, what's happening in our country is the parents, once they know the diagnosis of their son or daughter, they would not go back anymore to the development pediatrician. Some of them, maybe out of 100, only 4 or 5 of them would go back, or one out of the 100 would only wait for the release of the doctor. So because services related to special education is very expensive, so that I could understand that part. No, services is really expensive. That's why they would not really pursue or continue with it.
Yeah, that's very true. So sometimes it's not really that accessible to the public.
Yes.
Getting the proper diagnosis, getting the proper treatment, it's not really accessible. And this is also one of the reasons why we are doing this podcast, so that people would also be aware without actually paying that much, paying for the education that they need to know about these cases. So thank you, Teacher Q, for
Yes.
joining us for this. On that
Thank
note,
you.
what other advice can you give in terms of handling a child with autism?
Okay. Advice. As a parent, this is the first thing that I'm going to give as an advice to future parents or parents right now who suspect that their children have autism or any disability, is do not be afraid to have your child checked. Remember, if the more it is unknown or you're not certain what the condition of the child is, you would not be able to help the child. I mean, you don't know the condition, you don't know what's wrong, then you would just say there's something wrong with this kid, that this kid is not regular or is not normal. You're not gonna be helping the child. So seek for you don't have to go directly to a developmental pediatrician. Just go to a pediatrician and ask the pediatrician, can you refer me to a developmental pediatrician or to another professional which might be able to help me with the condition of my child? That's my advice to a parent. That's the first step, actually. Then whatever the doctor is giving to you, accept it. I know it's difficult because we're not really much into, the Philippines is not really much into Western medicine or to medicine, because we all still believe on the idea of mga witchcraft. So I have, for a long time that I have been parang teaching special children, even if the kids has been 5 years, 6 years under me, some of the parents would still say, sir, I have heard that from this one, we just have to bury a pig, my child would be okay. We do something like, sir, you when you teach the child, you wear this one so that he would be okay. I would still allow that one. I would allow, I would obey or say yes to their request, as long as for me it's not really that, if it's not too much that is gonna compete with my profession or madaot a profession, I would allow it. But yet I would still explain it to them. Mom, look, you know already the condition. But then they would sometimes say, sir, there's nothing wrong if we try. So I have done that one. I have done before, like the worst thing that I have done before is wear, every time I go to class, I have to wear or bring the clothing of the child that he wore last night during class. I have to place it on the table kasi for 2 months I have to do it and believe on it so that the child would be okay. So na even if how educated the family is, they would try other ways and means to look for solution. But then we always have to go back to scientific and realistic, interventions. Like for children with autism, the number one on the list would be therapist, speech therapist, occupational therapist. These are the ones that are gonna help. Na yung mga behavioral therapists, yung mga ABA system. These are things that are I'm so sure that would be very helpful for children with autism. As a teacher, my advice to parents teaching your son or daughter, it doesn't mean also that the concept there is that the child is in a school, the child has to, or the child with autism has to level himself or herself with the kids of his or her age. Meaning, if your child is 12 years old, you want your child also to reach the level of a 12-year-old in the regular school. That's not the case. That will not be the case, most likely. So, sometimes the teacher would teach the child or these skills. Like, I have a daughter who has special needs, but I'm teaching her now skills. She can bake. She can parang clean our room, clean our house. So, meaning you have to teach them skills that they would be productive, they would be helpful inside your community, inside your house, or to the community. But you don't really have to reach the level na if a 12 years old can do this one in our society, the child with autism has to reach that level also. That's not should be the case. I mean, you should not see that since the child is enrolled in a school, that the only thing that the child should learn is academic. The child should learn also skills which would make him a productive member of the society or the community.
Yeah, that's very true, Teacher Q. As for my sister, she is actually quite capable herself. She can bathe herself. She can wear her own clothes. She can even cook. Sometimes she would um she would take over when I'm cooking because she doesn't like what I'm cooking. So yeah, she's become productive because of she's been going to school at special education schools, whether it be public or private. They were able to teach her these skills that she needs to live, like a normal life or a quality life, wherein
Yeah,
uh,
productive.
she doesn't really need that much help anymore and doesn't need that much assistance anymore, so there's actually a chance for her to be independent. Thank you so much for that, Teacher Q. So I hope our listeners were able to learn something new from this and even follow your advice. So now, before we end this episode, Teacher Q, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Just to add this one, no? So the ones who created this podcast, the one who created, or they also created this Pic-A-Talk. Am I correct? Pic-A-Talk.
Pic-A-Talk.
So Pic-A-Talk, sorry. So they're actually on a right track. Because children with autism, according to studies, visual learners. So they learn better if it's seen, not just given instruction or written. They don't learn auditory wise. They don't learn if it's just written down. They actually learn visually. So visual schedules, picture exchange communication systems, these are very helpful for them. So this Pic-A-Talk system, I have not really seen it. I have not really tried it. But this is very much, for me, I think would be very helpful because children with autism, they are actually visual learners. That's why they can arrange things, they can pile things because they can see it visually. If that's how you want things to be done, they'll be able to follow it because they're visual learners. Okay. For me to plug, well, in Iligan City, there's a private special school that offers also both my physical therapy, my occupational therapy, my speech therapist also available. They also have SPED program. They have a home learning program or homeschool program. They also have transition programs. Well, you can visit naman Alexa's Haven in Iligan City. So you can, they're located in Kanaway. The other one also is in Cagayan de Oro. There's Learnersville. Actually, they don't cater to purely to special children, but they are actually very good right now with their online classes, which is also maybe very helpful for some special children. Again, as I mentioned, children with autism, they learn visually. So Learnersville is one of the places that you can maybe try in Cagayan de Oro. You can search them on Facebook. So Alexa Saven and Learnersville actually are found on Facebook. Also, I'd like to plug, if you'd like to ask questions, anything about special education, you can drop a message to me sa homepage, Teacher Q Activities. I also have a YouTube channel. Actually, this is not really to gain a lot of viewers. The reason for that one is because of this new normal setup that I have really to keep in touch with my students. So I only have around 20 students, but registered, but there are around 30 who keeps on parang asking me questions about special education, what they're going to do with their kids during this pandemic. So that could be another area. So I guess that's it.
All right. So thank you so much, Teacher Q, for the plug
Thank
for
you.
Pic-A-Talk and also for introducing us to Alexis Haven, Learnersville, and to your YouTube channel. So I hope everyone who has listened to this podcast will also subscribe to your channel and check it out. So thank you
Okay.
so much for making time on your busy schedule to take part in this project. The knowledge you shared with us today is invaluable and sure to make a difference. And also, thank you to our listeners or viewers, whichever platform you're listening from. If you have a personal story you'd like to share, you can reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, or email us at hq@pic-a-talk.com, and we'll feature your story on the podcast. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. So stay tuned for the next episode.